Okay, Ken and I are here today, and we want to talk about revolvers since Ken and I both go way back. We're both basically started out as revolver shooters. Ken, I know we don't typically agree on this topic. You know, I mean, you're the Smith & Wesson guy, and I'm the Colt guy, but we both love our revolvers and started out as revolver shooters.
Yeah, it's kind of like the Ford and Chevrolet argument.
It kind of is.
And one thing I've seen, Bill, it depends a lot on where you grow up. If you grow up in geographically an area, say where you were in Arkansas, and the revolver and the Colt was the brand that people liked, the gun guys liked, well, that's the way direction you're going to go. If you grew up in a part of America where Smith & Wesson brand loyalty was strong, that's probably the way you're going to be affected. I remember my grandfather was a career police officer. I can remember as a little kid, I mean, I don't remember even how old, but I remember going over to his house with my dad. I was really small. And my grandfather was retired. I don't know how old he was. He's probably my age, but it seemed to me like he was older than dirt. But he had an old kitchen chair, you know, painted wood chair beside his bed. And on that chair was an old Ever-Ready flashlight, which was what they used back then. What he called his mace, a blackjack, and a 5-inch Smith & Wesson military police. What we call Model 10s today, but a military police revolver, blued, well used. I mean, he'd carried it all of his career, and the stocks were worn on and stuff. But to me, I remember as a little kid, you know, I go in his bedroom and I see that thing, and I remember thinking, oh my God, that is the coolest thing in the world. It's pure business. And from that point on, I was always thinking, someday, as a kid, I got to have one of those. And my uncle or grandfather never called it a military police. He always said, that's my Smith & Wesson Police Special. And it was what we know now today as the Model 10, yeah. But then it was just, an old military police. So I was always more affected by the Smith & Wesson. And in the area where I lived there in southeastern Ohio, every cop carried a Smith & Wesson revolver. And most of the people I know that had revolvers. And as you know, when we were growing up, revolvers, handguns were not nearly as popular as they are today. Most people were rifle and shotgun people. Mm-hmm. And if they had a handgun, it's probably a 22. I mean, centerfire handguns were nobody reloaded. Ammunition was expensive. The norm would be a 38 special if you shot a handgun. Some guys, World War II vets, had brought back like Lugers and P-38s, and a lot of them had 1911s. But for the most part, it was a revolver world. And just like you grew up loving a Colt, and actually, I remember when I met you, you were a big Colt Python fan, and we kid about this, and it's kind of interesting because, I just visited your gun vault, and you've got probably one of the nicest collections of Colt Pythons that I've ever seen. I mean, you got spectacular stuff, and you're really fond of them. I grew up on Smiths. When I was about probably 13 years old, and this is pre-1968 Gun Control Act, the thing I wanted more than anything else was a Smith & Wesson K-22 revolver, what's now known as the Model 17. I remember one summer I worked, between the school year, I worked all summer. I did everything from mowing grass, scraping paint, caddying at the country club. I worked all summer. I mean, I'd go out and pick up soda bottles, and you get 3 cents a piece. But I mean, I saved all summer, and at that time, the guy was kind of the mentor. The guy that kind of got me really interested in guns was a guy named Charlie Gillis. And I think he had an FFL or something, but I remember he said, I can get you one. And the price was $68.70. And that was a lot of money to save. And I'll be honest, to this day, I despise scraping paint. I would not scrape paint if my life depended. I despise it. But I mowed yards, I did all that stuff. So I bought the K-22. By the way, I still have it.
Oh, that's great.
And I shot a blue million rounds through it. I got a job after school as a stock boy in a paint store and paid $10.50 a week. So every night after school, I'd go work until they closed, and all day on Saturday. And on Saturday, when I got finished, the guy I worked for would give me $10.50. And I'd get on my bicycle and ride to the local sporting goods store and buy a brick of 22 ammo, which is like $5.20 or something like that. And I would shoot that ammo up before the next weekend rolled around. I mean, I would find a way to get out and shoot it up. And so I started, revolver's what I started with. And and eventually, you know, when I went in law enforcement, it was all revolvers then. So I've always been into revolvers. I've always been kind of fond of Smith and Wessons. You know, we grew up during the days of when the gun magazines were the source of information, and if you were a rifle guy, you read Jack O'Connor or Bob Hagel. If you were a handgun guy, it was either Elmer Keith or Jeff Cooper or Bill Jordan or Skeeter Skelton or whatever. So that always affected our psyche. But to this day, I tell people, I think that as you get older, you do try to relive your youth. I mean, look at the guys our age group that are now just wacko about muscle cars, you know, restored and whatever, because maybe you couldn't afford a Corvette when you were, you know, at the age you wanted one because you had a mortgage and kids in school and all that stuff. Well, now you say, guess what? I'm going to have that hot rod. Yeah. And the same thing, a lot of us said, you know, when I was that age, I wanted a Smith 29, but there's no way I could afford one, or a Colt Python. And now we're at the point in life where we say, oh yeah, I can have them. So I find myself attracted to them. I go into a gun shop now, and I go to the used gun section, and invariably I look at revolvers first. And I still buy some. I've been shooting them a lot lately, because they're fun. Guys said, well, would you carry one? I said, no, I probably would not pick one as a gun to carry for self-defense. But you know what? If that's all I had, I guarantee you, I get the job done.
Oh yeah.
You know, so I still shoot them. I still find it really challenging. I tend to lean towards the Smith & Wesson because I believe the double action trigger on the Smith & Wesson is superior to anything Colt ever made. Now, I know you were into tuned pythons. Didn't you shoot it? Was it a Moran you shot, or what python did you shoot?
Actually, the main ones I shot, I kind of learned how to do them myself.
Well,
I did the actions on them myself, the ones that actually got pounded a lot of rounds.
Yeah, because you had to keep running.
Eventually got a Moran python, but I mean, it waited so long to get it and everything, I really didn't want to shoot it much because, you know, I don't know if I could ever get another one, you know.
Yeah. But the kicker is that, you know, I've remained loyal to Smith & Wessons. You've remained loyal to Colts. I grew up on the K-frame, so I have to admit I like shooting them better. But I have a kind of weakness for the end frames. That's the guns that really kind of get me, wow, that's a cool gun. So people ask me, you know, we often talk, you know, in the summer months, it's so hot down here in Texas, you stay in the air conditioning, do your reloading. Where I live up in north central Idaho, the winter is so friggin' cold, I stay inside and reload, you know. So I try to reload enough ammo during the winter months to get me through the warm months. And just the other day, I popped the last can of 38 Special, and I could see the bottom of the can. Oops, miscalculated. I don't think I'm going to make it, although we've already had our first snow, so
Won't be long. You'll be back in the reloading room.
And so, yeah, the revolvers are for me, are still attractive. I really dig them. The other thing, which is much like you and I, we look at those guns, and those were made back in the days when craftsmen built firearms. Today, we live in a world of guns are assembled.
Yep.
They're not fitted anymore. So when you pick up like a pre-1980 Smith & Wesson revolver and you look at the quality and the fit, and it's like that's never going to return again. You know, I often tell people, one of the reasons, I get this all the time, Bill. People say to me, hey Ken, I want to buy a good 1911. What do I buy? I say, buy a Wilson Combat. And they always go, oh my God, that's $3,000. I go, no, actually you haven't been up to date. They're more like $4,000. I can't afford it. Okay, cool. How much do you want to spend? And then we just determine the amount of money they want to spend. If they say, well, I want to spend up to $1,000, I say, well, buy a Colt. Well, I want to spend between $1,000 and $2,000, I say, buy a Dan Wesson, you know. But if you want to buy a gun that's really good, if you want the gun that is built by a craftsman, this hand-fitted, with no substitute quality parts, no MEM, you want a gun that's built the way you think your dream firearm should be, that is precise. The Wilson Combat is one of the, there's other makers in the United States now that are making hand-fitted custom guns, but I still believe that you guys are number one.
Yeah, we try real hard.
Yeah.
We sure do. Yeah, and the Python, we're talking about the hand fitting. They take even more of it than your Smith & Wessons. I mean, there's no interchangeable parts in a Colt Python, as you well know.
Well, as you know, Bill, up until earlier this year, I've worked for Colt Firearms as kind of a product ambassador, if you will. And as a result, I've had to work at the SHOT Show for Colt, man the booth, and in the NRA show. And it's interesting, like at the NRA show this year, it was almost a given. About every third or fourth person that came in the booth would say, when are you going to make the Python again? And my answer is, never. And they go, well, actually, let me explain to you. The people who made those are dead or long retired. That skill is never, ever going to be replicated. You cannot build, if Colt built a Python the way they made it before, you couldn't afford it.
It would be higher than the inflated prices
Exactly.
that the old guns are.
Exactly. So I just tell people, if you want one, go out and find it. And they say, well, they're really expensive. Yeah, well, that's everything good in life generally is. So it's beautiful. And I have to admit, when people tell me about, I said, look, the Python is probably one of the most attractive handguns that's ever been made. It is a beautiful firearm, beautifully finished. Everything about it is super attractive. I'm not probably as impressed with their durability as you are, but that's what makes the world go.
That's right. Thank you.
Yep.